Ethan Moore looked like he'd gotten lost on his way to a chess tournament. Thick-rimmed glasses, pale skin, skinny frame drowning in an oversized orange jumpsuit. He carried a stack of books under one arm during his first walk through C Block, squinting nervously at the other inmates. The guards whispered he was in for tax fraud, white-collar crime, some accountant who'd embezzled from his company. Victor Vicious Castellano ran C Block with absolute authority. Former cartel enforcer serving life without parole for 12 murders. He had 20 soldiers in his crew, and they fed on weakness like sharks smelling blood. They found Ethan in the library on day 3, alone, reading a book about ancient Rome. "Hey, Four Eyes!" Victor called out, his crew blocking the exits. "Library's closed. Everybody pays rent in my block. What you got for me?" Ethan looked up slowly, adjusting his glasses. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I don't have anything. I'm sorry." Victor grabbed him by the collar and lifted him out of his chair. "Then I guess we gotta teach you how things work around here." Ethan's book fell to the floor. The Art of Assassination, a History. Victor didn't notice the title. He also didn't notice how Ethan's breathing hadn't changed, how his hands hung loose at his sides, completely relaxed, how his eyes behind those thick glasses were tracking every person in the room with cold, mechanical precision. "Last chance, nerd," Victor snarled. "Give me something or what?" Ethan interrupted quietly. "Stay with me until the end, because what this accountant does in the next 4 seconds will leave Victor unconscious, 3 of his crew dead, and force the FBI to reveal that Ethan Moore isn't just a killer. He's one of the most prolific contract assassins in modern history. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The silence in the library stretched, like a taut wire ready to snap. Victor's grip tightened on Ethan's collar, his knuckles whitening with rage. 20 years of intimidating inmates had taught him that fear was immediate. You could smell it, see it in the way shoulders hunched and voices trembled. But Ethan wasn't trembling. He wasn't sweating. His pulse, if Victor had bothered to check, was steady at 62 beats per minute. The same resting heart rate he'd maintained during his last contract kill in Prague 3 months ago. "You got a hearing problem?" Victor's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "I asked you what you got for me." 3 of Victor's crew moved closer. Tank Rodriguez, 260 pounds of muscle and poorly healed scars. Spider Williams, whose switchblade had ended 6 different prison disputes. And Marcus Bone Crusher Thompson, who'd earned his nickname by shattering a rival gang member's spine with his bare hands. They formed a perfect triangle around Ethan, cutting off any possible escape route. Standard intimidation formation. Textbook prison hierarchy enforcement. What they didn't know was that Ethan had memorized their positions the moment they entered the library. He'd calculated the exact distance to each exit, noted the placement of every table and chair, and identified 17 different ways to kill everyone in the room using only objects within arm's reach. "I think maybe you don't understand how things work in here," Victor continued, his breath hot against Ethan's face. "See, I run this block. My word is law, and when I ask for something, I get it, one way or another." Ethan blinked once behind his thick glasses, a slow, deliberate blink that lasted exactly 2 seconds. To Victor, it looked like submission. To anyone who'd worked in the intelligence community, it would have been recognized as something else entirely, a kill switch activating. "Please," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "I really don't have anything. I'm just an accountant. I made some mistakes with numbers, that's all." Tank laughed, a sound like grinding concrete. "Hear that? He's just an accountant who made mistakes with numbers." Spider flicked open his switchblade, the metal catching the fluorescent lights. "Maybe we should help him count, starting with his fingers." Bone Crusher cracked his knuckles, each pop echoing like gunshots in the confined space. "I vote we start with his ribs." Nice and slow. Make sure he remembers the lesson. Victor smiled, revealing teeth stained yellow from decades of cigarettes and violence. This was his favorite part. The moment when resistance crumbled and his authority became absolute. The moment when even the toughest inmates realized they had two choices: submit or suffer. But as he stared into Ethan's magnified eyes through those thick lenses, something made him pause, something he couldn't quite identify. The accountant's pupils weren't dilated with fear. They weren't darting around looking for escape routes. They were fixed, steady, focused, almost predatory. "You know what I think?" Victor said, shaking off the strange feeling. "I think you're holding out on me. I think you got commissary money stashed somewhere. Maybe some family on the outside sending you care packages." "My family is dead," Ethan said simply. The words hung in the air like smoke. No emotion, no pain, just a flat statement of fact delivered in the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather. Tank shifted uncomfortably. There was something wrong with the way the nerd had said it, like he wasn't mourning his family, like he was just reciting information from a file. "Dead how?" Victor asked, curiosity overriding his anger for a moment. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying Victor's face with the intensity of an entomologist examining a particularly interesting insect. "Car accident. Very unfortunate, very sudden." Spider whistled low. "Damn, that's cold, man." "Sorry to hear it." "I'm not," Ethan replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor's grip loosened slightly as his brain struggled to process what he'd just heard. The accountant wasn't mourning his dead family. He was stating facts. Clinical, detached, almost satisfied. "What kind of person says that about their own family?" Bone Crusher muttered. Ethan's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could freeze blood. "The kind of person who arranged the accident." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. He released Ethan's collar and took a step back, his street-smart instincts finally screaming warnings his conscious mind was still trying to process. But it was already too late. Ethan's right hand moved with surgical precision, not fast enough to seem superhuman, not theatrical enough to seem trained, just efficient, economical, professional. His fingertips found the pressure point beneath Victor's left ear, applying exactly 14 pounds of force at the correct angle. Victor's eyes rolled back, his massive frame collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. Before Tank could react, before Spider could raise his knife, before Bone Crusher could take a step forward, Ethan was already moving. The transformation was instantaneous. The nervous accountant vanished, replaced by something that moved like liquid death. His glasses didn't fall off. His breathing didn't change. His heart rate remained steady, but everything else about him became lethal. Tank reached for Ethan just as the accountant's elbow connected with his solar plexus. The impact drove every molecule of air from Tank's lungs, while simultaneously rupturing his diaphragm. He dropped to his knees, gasping like a fish out of water, his face turning purple. Spider lunged with his switchblade, the same move that had worked against dozens of other inmates. The blade sliced through empty air as Ethan sidestepped with minimal effort. Spider's momentum carried him forward into Ethan's waiting palm, which struck his throat with the force of a sledgehammer. The sound Spider made wasn't quite human. His switchblade clattered to the floor as he clutched his crushed windpipe, blood frothing from his lips. Bone Crusher, the smartest of the three, turned to run. He made it exactly 4 steps before Ethan's fingers found the cluster of nerves at the base of his skull. Bone Crusher's legs betrayed him, sending him crashing face first into a bookshelf. Medieval history texts rained down on his unconscious form. The entire encounter had lasted 8 seconds. Ethan straightened his glasses, smoothed down his jumpsuit, and picked up his book from where it had fallen. The Art of Assassination, a History. He'd been reading Chapter 12, Poisons of the Renaissance. Fascinating period. So much innovation in the field. Isons of Poe the Renaissance Perio fascinating. So much innovation in the field. 4 guards appeared at the library, entrance within minutes, their boots echoing against concrete as they surveyed the scene. 3 inmates down, 1 unconscious, blood pooling beneath Spider's still form. And in the center of it all, Ethan Moore sat calmly in his chair, book open in his lap, reading as if nothing had happened. "What the hell went down in here?" Officer Martinez demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. Ethan looked up with genuine surprise, his voice carrying that same nervous tremor. "I'm not sure. They were fighting each other when I got here. Very violent. I tried to stay out of the way." The guards exchanged glances. Tank was still gasping on the floor, his face slowly returning to normal color. Spider had stopped moving entirely. Bone Crusher lay buried under a pile of history books, breathing but unresponsive. "You didn't see what started it?" Officer Chen asked, studying Ethan's innocent expression. "I was reading," Ethan replied, holding up his book. "I don't really pay attention to prison politics. I'm just trying to serve my time quietly." Martinez crouched next to Victor, checking his pulse. Strong and steady, but the gang leader was completely unconscious. No visible injuries, no obvious cause for his condition. "Medical emergency?" Chen suggested. "Maybe," Martinez muttered, but something felt wrong. 3 of the most dangerous inmates in C Block, all down simultaneously, and the only witness was a tax fraud nerd who claimed he'd been reading the whole time. As the medical team arrived and began treating the injured, Ethan quietly gathered his things. The guards were too busy with the chaos to notice him slip away, returning to his cell like a ghost, disappearing into shadows. His cellmate, Rico Morales, was waiting with barely contained excitement. Word traveled fast in prison, and the story was already spreading through the block like wildfire. "Yo, you hear what happened in the library?" Rico whispered. "Vicious and his whole crew got taken down. Nobody knows what happened, but they're saying it was some kind of coordinated hit." Ethan removed his glasses and began cleaning them methodically. "Really? How unfortunate. I hope everyone's okay." "Okay? Spider's dead, man. Tank can barely breathe. Bone Crusher's got a concussion. And Victor's in some kind of coma. The whole power structure just got flipped upside down." Ethan placed his glasses back on his nose and reached for another book from his small collection. Advanced Accounting Principles. The cover was worn, pages dog-eared from extensive reading. But if Rico had looked closer, if any of the guards had bothered to examine the book carefully, they would have noticed something interesting. The pages inside didn't match the cover. Instead of tax codes and financial regulations, the text discussed pressure points, nerve clusters, and the precise application of force required to stop a human heart. "Prison's a dangerous place," Ethan said quietly, opening his book to a chapter titled Delayed Reaction Techniques. "People should be more careful." 3 hours later, Warden Patricia Morrison sat in her office reviewing the incident reports. 23 years of running maximum security facilities had taught her to recognize patterns, and this particular pattern made her deeply uncomfortable. Victor Castellano wasn't just any inmate. He was one of the most connected criminals on the West Coast. His arrest had taken down 6 cartel operations, and his testimony had put away another 15 high-level dealers. The fact that he'd been neutralized so efficiently suggested professional work. But professionals didn't get caught embezzling from accounting firms. Professionals didn't end up in general population wearing thick glasses and carrying books about Roman history. Morrison picked up her secure phone and dialed a number she'd hoped never to use again. "Deputy Director Walsh? This is Warden Morrison at C Block Federal. I need to talk to you about one of my inmates, Ethan Moore. Yes, the tax fraud case. No, I don't think he's what his file says he is." The conversation lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it ended, Morrison's face had gone pale. She immediately called for a security review of Ethan's cell, his personal belongings, and his complete criminal history. What they found changed everything. The books in Ethan's possession weren't random selections from the prison library. Each one had been modified. Hollowed-out pages contained detailed floor plans of the facility, guard rotation schedules, and profiles of every significant inmate in C Block. Hidden compartments held items that shouldn't exist in any prison. Lockpicks fashioned from melted plastic, a garrote wire made from shoelaces and metal fragments, and a small vial of clear liquid that field tests couldn't identify. But the most disturbing discovery was a photograph tucked inside his accounting textbook. It showed Victor Castellano leaving a courthouse 3 months ago, completely unaware he was being watched. Someone had drawn a red X across his face. Morrison stared at the evidence spread across her desk. Either Ethan Moore was the most prepared tax fraud defendant in history, or her prison was housing something much more dangerous than anyone had realized. Her phone rang again. Deputy Director Walsh, calling back sooner than expected. "Warden Morrison, we've got a problem. The real Ethan Moore died in a car accident 6 weeks before your inmate was arrested. Whoever you've got in custody, it's not him." The blood drained from Morrison's face. "Then who is he?" "We're still working on that. But we've got facial recognition running against every database we can access. International criminal networks, terrorist watch lists, missing persons reports. So far, nothing. Whoever this guy is, he doesn't exist in any official capacity." Morrison looked out her office window toward the cell blocks below. Somewhere in that maze of concrete and steel, a professional killer was masquerading as a harmless accountant. A killer so skilled that he'd taken down 4 experienced criminals without breaking a sweat. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Nothing yet. Don't isolate him. Don't change his routine. Don't do anything that might alert him we're onto him. We need to find out who he really is and why he's there before we make any moves. And if he kills again?" The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "Then we'll know for sure what we're dealing with." Morrison hung up and reached for her emergency protocols manual. In 23 years, she'd never had to implement code black procedures. Extreme threat containment. The kind of situation that required federal intervention and complete facility lockdown. But first, she needed to understand exactly what was happening in C Block. Because if her suspicions were correct, the library incident wasn't random violence. It was the opening move in a much larger game. And Ethan Moore, whoever he really was just getting started. Was in a much larger game. Ain't random violence? Whoever opening moved Ethan Moore, he really getting was just started. The morning after the library incident, C Block buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread through the prison grapevine faster than a wildfire in drought season. Victor's crew was finished. 3 of the most feared inmates in the facility had been neutralized by someone who looked like he couldn't open a pickle jar without help. Ethan maintained his routine with clockwork precision. Morning exercises in his cell, though what looked like gentle stretching to his cellmate Rico was actually a complex series of movements designed to keep his reflexes sharp. Breakfast in the cafeteria, where he sat alone reading another innocent-looking book while memorizing conversation patterns and identifying potential threats. The power vacuum left by Victor's downfall created opportunities for ambitious inmates. 3 different factions began positioning themselves to claim C Block territory. The Aryan Brotherhood, led by a mountain of hatred named Klaus Brennan. The Latin Kings, commanded by Eduardo El Jefe Vasquez. And the Black Guerrilla family, whose leader Marcus Washington had been waiting years for Victor's empire to crumble. Each group watched Ethan with calculating interest. The accountant, who'd somehow survived an encounter that left Victor's crew destroyed, represented either a valuable asset or a dangerous unknown. In prison mathematics, unknowns didn't last long. Klaus made the first move during lunch period. 6 feet of Aryan supremacist muscle, covered in swastika tattoos and barely contained rage. He approached Ethan's table with 2 lieutenants flanking him like attack dogs. "Heard you had some trouble yesterday," Klaus said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of someone who'd spent too many years shouting racial slurs in county lockup. Terrible shame about Victor, real tragedy. Ethan looked up from his mystery meat and processed vegetables, blinking owlishly behind his thick glasses. Yes, very unfortunate. I hope he recovers soon. Klaus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Recovers? Boy, Victor ain't recovering from nothing. Word is he's brain dead. Doctors say he might never wake up. This was news to Ethan, though his expression didn't change. He'd calculated the pressure point strike to cause temporary unconsciousness, not permanent damage. Either his technique had been more precise than intended, or Victor's physiology was more fragile than anticipated. That's terrible, Ethan said, returning to his food. I hope his family finds peace during this difficult time. Klaus's smile disappeared. In prison, false sympathy was often more insulting than direct threats. See, here's the thing, accountant. Victor's gone, which means his protection racket is up for grabs. Everyone in C Block needs new management, new leadership. I don't really involve myself in prison politics, Ethan replied politely. I'm just trying to serve my time quietly. One of Klaus's lieutenants, a scarred enforcer named Diesel, leaned forward aggressively. You don't get to choose, Fish. You're either with us or against us. And being against us ain't healthy for your continued existence. Ethan set down his plastic fork and studied the three men with mild interest. Klaus outweighed him by 80 pounds of prison muscle. Diesel carried himself like former military, probably Marines based on his posture and the faded eagle tattoo on his forearm. The third man, nicknamed Razor, had the quick, nervous movements of someone who'd spent decades fighting with improvised weapons. 3 different fighting styles, 3 different threat profiles. Klaus would rely on brute force and intimidation. Diesel would use tactical thinking and disciplined violence. Razor would be unpredictable, dangerous in close quarters. All 3 would be dead within 15 seconds if they pushed too far. I appreciate the offer, Ethan said, his voice carrying that same nervous tremor that had fooled Victor. But I really don't have anything to contribute. I'm just an accountant. Klaus's face reddened with anger. Respectful refusal was somehow worse than outright defiance. It suggested that Ethan didn't consider them worth fearing. Maybe you didn't hear me right, Klaus growled, standing to his full, intimidating height. This ain't a request. This is how things work now. You pay tribute to me, or you learn what happens to people who don't respect the natural order. The cafeteria had grown quiet. Hundreds of inmates sensed approaching violence with the instincts of predators who'd survived by recognizing danger. Guards moved closer, but prison fights happened fast. By the time they intervened, blood would already be spilled. Ethan finished chewing his last bite of processed meat, dabbed his lips with his napkin, and looked up at Klaus with those magnified eyes that seemed so harmless behind thick lenses. What happened to Victor wasn't natural order, he said quietly. It was just Tuesday. The words hit Klaus like cold water. There was something in the accountant's tone that made his street-smart instincts scream warnings. Something that suggested Tuesday hadn't been random. Something that implied Victor's fate had been intentional. You saying you had something to do with what happened to Victor? Diesel asked, his military training making him more observant than his leader. Ethan tilted his head slightly, considering the question with academic interest. I'm saying that sometimes people make assumptions about others based on appearances. Sometimes those assumptions prove inaccurate. Razor's hand moved toward his waistband, where he kept a sharpened piece of metal. The movement was subtle, practiced, almost invisible to untrained eyes. Ethan noticed it immediately. I wouldn't recommend that, he said conversationally, never taking his eyes off Klaus. Prison fights are so unpredictable. Someone could get seriously hurt. Klaus had built his reputation on violence and intimidation. Backing down from a pencil-pushing accountant would destroy his credibility with every faction in C Block. But something about Ethan's calm demeanor was triggering alarm bells in his head. You threatening me, Four Eyes? Klaus demanded, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments earlier. "I don't make threats," Ethan replied, standing slowly from his chair. "I make observations, and I observe that you're standing too close to me for this conversation to end well for everyone involved." The cafeteria fell completely silent. Even the guards stopped moving, sensing that something significant was about to happen. In maximum security prisons, moments like these decided who lived and who died, who ruled and who served. Klaus had a choice: walk away and lose face, or commit to violence against someone who'd already demonstrated that appearances could be deceiving. His pride made the decision for him. Klaus swung his massive fist toward Ethan's head with enough force to shatter bone. The punch was telegraphed, obvious, the kind of haymaker that worked against intimidated victims, but failed against anyone with real training. Ethan moved like liquid mercury, not fast enough to seem superhuman, not dramatically enough to seem trained, just efficiently, economically, professionally. Klaus's fist whistled through empty air as Ethan sidestepped with minimal effort. The momentum carried Klaus forward, off balance, vulnerable. Ethan's palm struck Klaus's temple with surgical precision, applying exactly the right amount of force to disrupt neural function without causing permanent damage. Klaus collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Diesel reached for his weapon, but Ethan was already inside his guard. A knee to the solar plexus doubled Diesel over, positioning his neck perfectly for the chokehold that followed. Former Marine or not, Diesel's combat training hadn't prepared him for this level of efficiency. He was unconscious in 3 seconds. Razor managed to draw his sharpened metal, a piece of rebar filed to razor sharpness. He slashed at Ethan's midsection with the wild desperation of someone who'd suddenly realized he was outclassed. Ethan caught Razor's wrist, twisted with mechanical precision, and relieved him of his weapon. The sharpened metal clattered to the floor as Razor screamed, his wrist bent at an impossible angle. "Broken radius and ulna," Ethan observed clinically. "Clean breaks. Should heal properly with medical attention." 3 more of C Block's most dangerous inmates, neutralized in under 10 seconds. Ethan straightened his glasses, smoothed his jumpsuit, and returned to his seat. He picked up his book, a worn copy of Advanced Statistical Analysis, and resumed, reading as if nothing had happened. The guards finally reached the scene, finding 3 unconscious or injured inmates and 1 accountant quietly studying mathematical formulas. Medical teams were called. Incident reports were filed. Security footage was reviewed. And in her office, Warden Morrison received another phone call from Deputy Director Walsh. "We've got a preliminary identification," Walsh said without preamble. "Facial recognition finally got a hit, but you're not going to like this." Morrison felt her stomach drop. "Tell me." "Your accountant matches a classified file from Interpol. Codename The Actuary. Real name unknown. Suspected in over 40 professional assassinations across 6 countries spanning the last 15 years. He specializes in infiltration and elimination of high-value targets in secure environments." The file continued for several minutes. A ghost who moved through international criminal networks like smoke. No confirmed photographs. No verified personal history. No permanent address or known associates. "Why would an international assassin get himself arrested for tax fraud?" Morrison asked. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But based on the pattern of his previous contracts, we think Victor Castellano was the target. Everything else is just cover." Morrison looked out her window toward the cell blocks. Somewhere down there, one of the world's most dangerous killers was reading accounting textbooks and pretending to be afraid of prison bullies. "What are my orders?" "Maintain the status quo. Don't let him know we've identified him. We're coordinating with Interpol and the CIA to understand what he's really doing here." "But Morrison?" "Yes? If he decides to stop playing his cover role, evacuate your staff immediately. This man has killed government officials, crime bosses, and trained operatives. Your guards won't stand a chance." As Morrison hung up the phone, she wondered how many other inmates in Her facility weren't what they appeared to be. How many seemingly harmless criminals were actually predators in disguise? And most importantly, who had hired the actuary to eliminate Victor Castellano, and what would happen when his contract was complete? That evening, news of the cafeteria incident spread through C Block like wildfire consuming dry grass. The accountant who couldn't hurt a fly had just dismantled 3 of the most feared white supremacists in the facility. Klaus Brennan lay in the medical ward with what doctors were calling unexplained neural disruption. Diesel remained unconscious despite showing no signs of physical trauma. Razor would need surgery to repair his shattered wrist bones. Eduardo El Jefe Vasquez received the report while playing dominoes in the recreation yard. 20 years of cartel warfare had taught him to recognize when patterns shifted, and this pattern was shifting fast. 2 major prison factions had now been neutralized by someone who looked like he'd never thrown a punch in his life. "Tell me again what happened," Eduardo said to his lieutenant, Carlos, without looking up from his game. Klaus tried to recruit the accountant for protection money. Same speech he gives everyone. But when things got physical, the nerd dropped all 3 of them faster than you could blink. Eduardo placed a domino with deliberate precision. And how exactly does a tax fraud defendant know how to fight like that? Carlos shifted uncomfortably. "Nobody knows, Jefe. Guards are saying it was luck. Maybe the Aryans were drunk on prison wine. But the other inmates who saw it, they're telling a different story." "What story?" "They're saying the accountant moved like he'd done it before. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like those weren't his first bodies hitting the floor." Eduardo finally looked up from his dominoes, studying his lieutenant's face for signs of exaggeration or fear. Carlos had survived 3 gang wars and a cartel assassination attempt. He didn't spook easily. "Show me the footage," Eduardo ordered. Security cameras in C Block captured everything from multiple angles. Eduardo watched the cafeteria incident twice, his experienced eyes analyzing each frame for details others might miss. The accountant's positioning, his breathing patterns, the surgical precision of his movements. Most importantly, the complete absence of surprise or panic in his demeanor. "This man is not an accountant," Eduardo concluded, switching off the monitor. "Accountants don't neutralize trained fighters without breaking concentration. Accountants don't know pressure points that cause instant unconsciousness." "So what is he?" Eduardo leaned back in his chair, memories surfacing from his years running cartel security operations. He'd worked with specialists before, men who killed for money rather than passion, men who could infiltrate any environment and eliminate targets without leaving traces. "I think he's exactly what Victor's crew discovered too late. A professional." The realization changed everything. If the accountant was indeed a contract killer, his presence in C Block wasn't coincidental. Someone had paid for him to be here. Someone wanted specific people eliminated, and they'd hired the best money could buy. "What do we do, Jefe?" Eduardo considered his options carefully. He could try to recruit the killer, offering protection and resources in exchange for services. He could attempt to eliminate him before he struck again. Or he could do something that went against every instinct developed during decades of criminal warfare. He could leave him alone. "We watch," Eduardo decided. "We observe. We learn who his real targets are before we make any moves. Because whoever sent him here, they're playing a much bigger game than prison politics." 3 blocks away, Marcus Washington was reaching similar conclusions. The leader of the Black Guerrilla family had built his reputation on strategic thinking rather than random violence. His faction controlled the drug trade in C Block through careful planning and disciplined execution. Marcus studied the same security footage that Eduardo had watched, his analytical mind processing details that confirmed his worst suspicions. The accountant's combat techniques were too refined for amateur training. His target selection was too precise for random self-defense. "Professional assassination," Marcus murmured to his second-in-command, Jerome. "Question is, who's paying his bills?" Jerome nodded grimly. Could be anyone with a grudge against Victor or Klaus. Hell, could be someone targeting all the faction leaders. Or it could be law enforcement, Marcus added, voicing the fear that haunted every career criminal in federal custody. Undercover operation designed to eliminate problems the courts couldn't handle. The possibility sent chills through both men. If the accountant was working for federal agencies, every major criminal in C Block was potentially marked for elimination. Their organizations, their territories, their very lives could disappear one calculated strike at a time. We need information, Marcus decided. Real information about who this man actually is. And we need it before he decides we're next on his list. The truth about Ethan Moore would eventually surface, but not before 3 more faction leaders mysteriously disappeared from C Block. The actuary had completed his contract with surgical precision, eliminating targets while maintaining his perfect cover as a harmless tax fraud defendant. When federal agents finally moved to extract him 6 months later, they found an empty cell and a note written in Victor's blood. The books were more educational than expected. Prison officials never discovered how he escaped, and the actuary vanished back into the shadows where legends are born. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that look like prey.